There are crimes so brutal, so shocking, that they seem almost too horrific to be real. Some make headlines for weeks, while others, despite their sheer brutality, fade into the shadows of history. Tonight, we're diving into two of the most disturbing true crime cases, one from the dark underbelly of 1980s Chicago, where a sadistic group of killers known as the Chicago Rippers carried out unspeakable horrors, and another from 2020, when a quiet Canadian community was torn apart by one of the deadliest rampages in the country's history. These crimes are vastly different in nature, separated by decades and motives, yet they share one chilling similarity. Both left behind a trail of devastation that still haunts those who survived. From the satanic rituals and sadistic brutality of the Rippers to the calculated, relentless violence of the Nova Scotia mass killings, these stories will leave you questioning the very depths of human darkness. But be warned, these cases are not for the faint of heart. Let's begin. Story 1. The 1980s in Chicago, a city known for its towering skyline, deep dish pizza, and bustling streets. But beneath the surface, something far more sinister lurked. A string of brutal murders and disappearances terrorized the city, targeting women in ways so gruesome that even hardened detectives were left shaken. Between 1981 and 1982, the Windy City became the hunting ground for one of the most depraved cult-like gangs in modern history, an evil so twisted that even now, over 40 years later, their crimes remain some of the most horrifying ever recorded. This is the terrifying true story of the Chicago Rippers. It all began with missing women. Young women, often alone, vanishing without a trace from the streets of Chicago. Many were last seen in areas known for prostitution or near bars and nightclubs. For months, police found no connection, no pattern, just scattered disappearances, cases that seemed unrelated. That was until the bodies started showing up. Women were found dumped near highways and industrial areas, their bodies displaying signs of brutal torture. Some victims were missing body parts, removed with surgical precision, as if their attackers were following some kind of ritual. The truth behind these gruesome murders wouldn't come to light until 1982, when a woman named Beverly Washington was found barely alive near railroad tracks. She had been mutilated, left for dead, but she survived. And what she told police changed everything. Beverly provided a chilling description of her attackers, a group of men who operated out of a van, abducting women off the streets and taking them to an unknown location, where they were subjected to unimaginable horrors before being discarded like trash. Her survival led investigators to a name: Robin Gecht. Robin Gecht wasn't your average criminal. He was charismatic, seemingly normal, even a family man. But beneath the facade, he was the leader of a sadistic cult-like gang that would later be known as the Chicago Rippers. Alongside 3 accomplices, Edward Spreitzer and brothers Andrew and Thomas Kokorolais, Gecht formed a group with one twisted goal: to abduct, torture, and kill women in what they saw as a ritualistic offering. Investigators soon uncovered their shocking methods. The Rippers would perform horrifying acts on their victims, mutilating them in a manner reminiscent of satanic rituals. Gecht, believed to be the ringleader, claimed to have used body parts in disturbing occult ceremonies inside his home. But there was more. Police discovered that Gecht had once worked with one of the most infamous serial killers in American history, John Wayne Gacy. Whether Gacy influenced Gecht or if it was mere coincidence remains unknown. With enough evidence in hand, authorities arrested the 4 men in 1982. During questioning, Gecht remained calm, denying everything, while his accomplices quickly turned on him, confessing to the unimaginable crimes they had committed together. Their trials were some of the most disturbing in Chicago's history. Edward Spreitzer and the Cocorales brothers detailed their horrific acts, exposing a level of evil that few could comprehend. Robin Gecht, however, never admitted guilt. Unlike his co-conspirators, he avoided the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison. Andrew Cocorales was executed in 1999, the last execution carried out in Illinois before the state abolished the death penalty. Thomas Cocorales, shockingly, was released on parole in 2019, sparking outrage and fear among those who still remembered his crimes. Edward Spreitzer remains in prison, serving a life sentence. The Chicago Rippers left a permanent scar on the city, a reminder that true evil can hide in plain sight. Their crimes weren't just murders, they were acts of depravity so vile that they seemed almost unbelievable. Decades later, the story of the Ripper crew still haunts Chicago. The survivors, the victims' families, and even the investigators who worked the case can never forget the horrors inflicted by these men. And while most of them remain behind bars, the thought of what they did, and why they did it, continues to disturb even the most seasoned true crime experts. Some cases fade into history. This one never will, because the Chicago Rippers weren't just murderers. They were monsters. Story 2, April 18, 2020. It was a quiet Saturday evening in the small, rural community of Portapique, Nova Scotia. With a population of just over 100 people, the town was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other, where doors were often left unlocked, and where crime, especially violent crime, was virtually unheard of. But that night, a nightmare was about to unfold. At 10:01 p.m., the first 911 calls came in. Homes were on fire. Gunshots echoed through the darkness, and by the time authorities arrived, chaos had already taken hold. What followed was the deadliest mass shooting in Canadian history, a 12-hour rampage that left 22 innocent people dead, along with several dogs, and a nation in shock. One of those victims was Gina Goulet, a dental hygienist who had survived cancer twice. She had spent her last evening on a phone call with her daughter, talking about plans for the future. Hours later, Wortman would arrive at her home, ending her life in cold blood. This is the horrifying story of the 2020 Nova Scotia attacks. The gunman was 51-year-old Gabriel Wortman, a denturist who owned a practice in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. To most, he appeared to be a successful businessman, but beneath the surface there were troubling signs: an obsession with law enforcement, a fascination with violence, and a history of domestic abuse. That evening, Wortman was at a gathering with his longtime partner at their property in Portapique. At some point, an argument erupted, escalating into a violent assault. His partner managed to escape and hid in the woods, where she remained for hours. What happened next was a meticulously planned attack that suggested Wortman had been preparing for this moment for some time. Dressed in a replica Royal Canadian Mounted Police (RCMP) uniform and driving a decommissioned police cruiser that he had modified to be nearly identical to a real RCMP vehicle, Wortman began his killing spree. He moved from house to house, setting some on fire, executing residents, and ensuring that few would escape to tell the tale. By the time police arrived, the gunman had vanished into the night. At first, authorities believed they were dealing with a house fire and a single shooting. But as the night unfolded, they realized something far worse was happening. They urged residents to shelter in place, but without an emergency alert system being activated, many had no idea that a killer was on the loose. Wortman had a plan. Over the next several hours, he moved through rural Nova Scotia, blending in by using his fake RCMP vehicle to pull over unsuspecting victims. Some were shot in their homes, others were targeted on the roads: a mother and her daughter, a teacher, a nurse, a correctional officer. No one was safe. Even strangers who happened to cross his path became victims. The RCMP, meanwhile, struggled to track Wortman down. With limited communication between officers and the public, largely unaware of the threat, he was able to continue his rampage for hours. There were missed opportunities, moments where he could have been stopped sooner, but confusion and lack of coordination delayed the response. By morning, the RCMP had finally identified Wortman as the suspect, but he remained on the move. It wasn't until nearly 12 hours after the first attack that he was finally cornered at a gas station in Enfield, Nova Scotia. After a brief confrontation, police opened fire, killing Wortman on the scene. The nightmare was finally over, but the devastation he left behind would haunt Nova Scotia forever. In the days that followed, Canadians struggled to make sense of the tragedy. How had Wortman managed to obtain multiple firearms, many smuggled from the United States? How had he gone unnoticed for so long despite past allegations of domestic violence? And why hadn't authorities acted sooner to warn the public? Investigations revealed significant failures in communication and emergency response. There was outrage over the delay in notifying residents, the ease with which Wortman impersonated law enforcement, and the missed opportunities to intervene before his rampage began. The massacre led to major changes in Canada's gun laws, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announcing a ban on over 1,500 models of assault-style firearms. It also prompted a public inquiry to uncover how such an attack could have happened and what could be done to prevent another. Beyond policy changes, the survivors and families of the victims faced an unimaginable journey of grief. Memorials were held, communities came together to mourn, and stories of the lives lost were shared across the country. Gina Goulet's daughter, along with many others, spoke about the immense loss and the struggle to heal in the aftermath of such violence. The Nova Scotia attacks remain a painful scar on Canada's history, a reminder that even in the most peaceful communities, unimaginable violence can occur. The 22 lives lost that day were more than just numbers. They were parents, siblings, children, and friends, people who should still be here today. As the years pass, one question lingers. Could it have been prevented? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime cases, mysterious events, and more. Until next time, please stay safe out there and as always, stay curious.